Thank you. Such moving images. And many of them were taken by one of our guests here this evening at the end of this row, Lynsey Addario, the acclaimed photojournalist who's documented war and its aftermath for the New York Times and so many other publications. Some of you might remember that she was held hostage in Libya in 2011 by forces loyal to Muammar Gaddafi. Next to her is Liz Clegg. Liz is a retired firefighter based in Birmingham, in England. For the last 7 months, she's lived in a trailer in a refugee camp in Calais, known as the Jungle. She took herself there in a truck to distribute shoes and food and saw a need so great that she couldn't bring herself to leave. Next, we have Zainab Zalbi, is the founder of Women for Women International, author and host and creator of a new TV show in the Middle East, The Nida Show. She left Saddam Hussein's Iraq in 1990, and she now lives between Dubai, Turkey, and New York. And finally, Becca Heller. She's the director and co-founder of the International Refugee Assistance Project at the Urban Justice Center. Just this week, she received the Charles Bronfman Prize for her groundbreaking work, deploying the vast network of law students that she's assembled to secure asylums for refugees in the US. Lynsey, let's start with you. You've documented conflict zones and the lives of refugees all over the world now for years. What are the most important things that you've seen and learned from this last set of pictures that we've been so moved to look at?
I think the hardest part of the job is realizing that we live in a society where we are completely inundated by images. Every second of the day, we're looking at images. So for someone like me, I'm trying to personalize these stories. When we started the Displaced Project and following these 3 children, I really needed to try and figure out how do I get really inside the heads of these children. So Hannah, for example, I basically slept with her. I was with her from 4 in the morning until she went to bed at 11 o'clock at night. I napped next to her. I went to work with her in the back of the truck, and then one day I was with them, and they were in a plum orchard picking plums from 6 o'clock in the morning. And suddenly, all the children around me got so exhausted, they literally started falling out of the trees. So I think the thing that people don't realize is there's so much that goes on behind the photograph. There's so much that we don't know. And so for us, we're really trying to always open that world up to people.
Oh, it's an unbelievable image. Liz, I'm sort of blown away by your story because, I mean, what was it that made you, right, a former firefighter working in Birmingham, as you were then with youth in Birmingham, get in your truck and drive to Calais, to the jungle? What made you do that? And what did you find when you got there?
I had access to rather a lot of tents and sleeping bags through some friends at a music festival, and I'd heard about the situation in Calais. And it just seemed obvious, it was so close. I decided to take this stuff over, which I did. And I did a few journeys. And after maybe the 3rd journey, I realized there was nobody there to give this stuff out to the people there. So I stayed, and that was 7 months ago, and I'm still there.
Wow, unbelievable. And I mean, what did you see in this camp? What did you find when you got there?
I was shocked. I was shocked at what was going on so close to my home in the UK. I did not think for 1 minute I would witness people being left in those conditions in the north of France. And I guess that's what made me stay, because I could not believe that nobody was responding to their needs.
Unbelievable. That's incredible that you did. Zainab, you know, you've founded Women for Women, and you've witnessed the particular perils and dangers faced by displaced women. And in your visits to refugee camps, what are the things that have, you know, hit you the most?
What hit me the most is always the choices people are forced to make. And some of these choices, I think no one should be put in that position to make them. I mean, in my recent visit to Iraq, my own home country, and I met a Yazidi guy who was one of the last people in his town to hear that ISIS is coming. So in a rush, he puts all 28 members of his family in a pickup truck, his mom and his wife next to him in the front seat, and he drives fast, and ISIS chase him in the process. And in the process of the chasing, he goes into a dirt road, and lots of bumps and all of that, and he sees his own 4-year-old daughter falling off the truck. And he has to choose in that moment, does he stop the truck and pick up the daughter, but ISIS actually will catch him and will kill all of the family? Or does he keep on driving and let the daughter out? And these choices, I mean, this guy, every time I hear this, I tell the story, I get touched. No one, no parent, no mother, no father should be able to make that choice. He's both ashamed of his choice, but also understands that he thinks that he made the right choice to save the rest of his family. And he is coexisting with that. It's in a state where he's paused in that moment. And so it's always, when you see with refugees, it's always people who are forced to make these decisions, whether leaving their children behind, leaving their life, their pictures, their homes. We talk about refugees as if they like being refugees. It's the most humiliating, indignified process of going through.
Right. Becca, you're working in such a granular way with refugees seeking asylum. Who are the people that you're helping, and how do you see the system failing them?
I mean, I think the amazing story that Zainab just told is an example of the system failing them. I mean, where is the system that this man is in a truck forced to choose between his 4-year-old daughter and the rest of his family? There are so many nation states and the United Nations and NGOs that are on the ground, but the patchwork response that we're trying to implement to find the most vulnerable people is not working, and most of the most vulnerable people are falling through the cracks. So a lot of our work is about going around to ostracized communities, like women who can't present themselves to the UN and ask for help because they've been sexually assaulted or abused, and they might literally get killed if someone finds out their story, and help them figure out how they can navigate the little aid that's available to them.
And how do they find you? And has the recent terror attacks that's created all this xenophobia, has it become more difficult? I mean, there you are, you're trying to get them visas.
People find us in all different ways. We have staff on the ground in the Middle East that do outreach. A lot of it is through word of mouth. We had a program helping women who had been trafficked that we found because they all got their hair cut at the same salon. And we just put an outreach worker in the salon, and she would conduct intakes with the women as they came in, and then we would represent their cases. I think that there's been a really, frankly, false conflation of refugees and terrorists, that the perpetrators of the tragic attacks in Belgium and in France were not refugees. They pretended to be refugees. They left the false passport of a refugee. And instead, we, as a world, have used our fear of these terrorists to continue to persecute the very people who are fleeing the terrorists, that the primary perpetrators of violence against refugees are the same terrorists that we're afraid of. And by failing to take in refugees, I think we're assisting with the mission of terror.
Yeah.
Lynsey, do you see do the refugees that you've spoken to, do they have any sense of what is happening with the terror attacks, or are they just so focused on survival?
Most of them are so focused on survival. I mean, these are people who are incredibly traumatized. They have watched their family members get killed, often in front of them. There are women who have been raped. Rape is a weapon of war. There are people who are fleeing for their lives. So when they get to a new country, they continuously have to cross border after border. And each border, there's hostility. And each place, they have to try to find shelter, food, how to survive. And so really, these are people who, they're not as concerned with geopolitics. They're not as concerned with how the rest of the world is looking at them. They just want a place to flee to.
Yeah. Well, Liz, I mean, you work a lot with children. I mean, there's a lot of unparented children in the Calais camp, correct? How do these children keep it together? How do you help them not fall apart? Because I guess one of the fears would be is that once they're in this camp, are they going to be able to function if there's so little structure for them?
Yeah, it's true, and one of the main reasons that I've stayed is because of the children, the unaccompanied children. There are literally hundreds of them. So I started a Women and Children's Centre And within our team, some of our team focus on the women and the younger children, and I've been drawn more into working with the unaccompanied boys. When I first met them, we had quite a few younger ones between 10 and 13 years old, and they displayed a lot of behavioural problems. But over the months, through consistency and sticking with them and showing them that somebody was willing to go through this with them, then their behaviour and their emotional well-being has improved a small amount. But the stress of living in these camps, of surviving amongst large groups of adults who are also suffering from stress and behavioural problems as a result of their journeys and their experiences at home, is incredibly difficult for these children.
How do you protect them? I mean, you told me, which I found really fascinating, that of course they sleep most of the day, and then at night they all go out. They're trying to get on trucks and they're trying to get on trains to escape. That sounds like an unbelievably dangerous situation for children.
We're in the terrible situation where we have absolutely no control over these children's movements, and they have been told and they're conditioned to try to get to the UK. In the last couple of weeks, tragically, we've lost 2 children as a result of their attempts to get to the UK. They've died, in one as a result of being in the back of a refrigerated lorry. He suffocated, and the other beautiful child managed to get across, and he was holding on to the underneath of a lorry, and it was involved in a crash, and he was killed in Britain. We've lost a number of other children in the similar circumstances in France with their attempts. So yes, we have no control. So we have to educate children with regards to the safety. I mean, I myself tried to educate them about the refrigerated lorries and make them understand that you can suffocate. We've tried to educate them about electrified railways, and how to look after themselves, and it's deeply wrong that we are informing children, because we have no control measures. There is nobody there assisting us. We are independent volunteers. There is no agency, no NGO that is assisting us to keep these children safe.
Becca, just listening to Liz, I mean, here you are with a lawyer who is so much in touch and working with these aid organizations. How do you respond to that? I mean, are you seeing such a complete, absolute sort of absence of oversight in this way, that this camp could be allowed to be this sort of feral place?
No, I mean, as a lawyer, my first inclination is obviously to sue somebody.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, there's no one to hold accountable here, and that's exactly what we're talking about, is that there's an international system of nation states and the UN, and there's all these agreements on paper about what people's rights ought to be. The reason that France doesn't want to go into the jungle, as it's called, and register people is because as soon as someone in the government knows your name, they can't deport you anymore. And they don't want to have that kind of obligation. And so what we're trying to do is say, hey, there's all these rights that people have that are written down, and there's no one there trying to help people. Your right shouldn't be, I have a right not to suffocate in the back of a freezer truck. It should be a right to be treated with dignity and have your situation processed in a manner that's concomitant with the fact that you're a survivor.
Mm-hmm. Well,
excellent.
Zainab, obviously not all the refugees are fleeing the direst of situations. I mean, some are leaving, for the whole host of reasons why they leave. Sometimes it's gender persecution, and sometimes it's natural disaster, and sometimes it's acute poverty, etc. What do you think is moving such an enormous amount of people? What do you hear when you talk to people about why they made the decision to undergo these unbelievable traumatic experiences to get away?
The number one thing that I'm hearing, and I'm focusing lately particularly on the Middle Eastern refugees, is we want to leave because we want to have a dignified life. And what they really are talking about is the dignity of being treated well as a citizen in their own country, the dignity of having a job, the idea of civil protection, legal rule of laws to operate. So it's not only that their circumstances is horrible, but they're also looking at a different way of living life. There's refugees that I met in Lebanon, in Shatila camp, known for having Palestinian refugees, now is hosting Syrian refugees. And this one woman, a couple, the woman was a headmistress of her school. The man, her husband, was a teacher. Their son is a music teacher. They're a good middle-class family, the typical middle-class family in Syria, and now they are living in horrendous, there is no dignity in the way they're living. They're living on the floor. The food that they get, the aid they get, anything they have is just all aid from other refugees of Shatila camp. So the old Palestinian refugees are now helping the Syrian refugees. So when this family wants to leave, when Haider, the man I talked about before, he had since a child recently, and I was talking with him, and he said he called her Bara, which means I give up, I surrender my country. And I said, why? And he said, because my country cannot protect me from this basic thing. So they are seeking a better life in Europe. I mean, not a better life, a dignified life in other countries where they believe that they have more respect for the rules of law. So it forces a discussion that the Middle East should have and is not yet happening yet.
Which is they're fleeing chaos, really. They're fleeing collapsed societies.
Absolutely, the end of state,
yeah.
The system, no water, no electricity, no all of these things. These countries were not like that before. These countries had a system, had an operating system, and now it has since collapsed. And you, as an individual, you are lost.
Yeah.
There's no one to protect you. You fetch for yourself, basically.
Yeah. Lynsey, the power of imagery to arouse sympathy and keep this spotlight on, because as we listen to these stories, they're so heartbreaking, but it's very hard to break through because people just turn off, and then there's a terrorist attack, and then they focus, and it's all in the wrong way, and then they just forget about it again. We all remember the shot of Elan, the Syrian child who was washed up on the beach and was taken by a Turkish photographer, a local photographer, and when it came out, it went completely viral, and there was a huge outpouring of sympathy, and that image got under people's skins in ways that all the talking and all the sort of UN discussions and so on could never really ever do. How do you feel we can keep that kind of focus up on this problem so that it stays human, so that you're hearing the kind of agony that we're hearing now and really feel moved to think about how you can contribute, how you can help, how you can build structures to help refugees?
Well, first of all, when that image first came out, many newspapers made a decision not to publish that picture because they felt it was too powerful or too graphic. For me, that's a complete crime, because how dare you not publish this image that is finally the image to get people talking? There was no blood in that picture. It was not graphic. In fact, the reason why that picture spoke to so many people was because it could have been any one of our children or any one of our brothers. It looked like a sleeping child, and in fact, he was dead trying to run for his life. So I think that's first and foremost, the fact that the initial instinct was to censor a picture like that. And when it finally started getting out and went viral, people had to respond. And that was the image, after thousands and thousands of images that we had all taken, that I had been working on the refugee issue since 2012, and I couldn't get anyone to care about Syrian refugees. That was the issue that made people start to address policy. Did anything happen? No. In the end, we're still in the same situation. Boatloads of refugees keep coming. People keep talking about what to do. Nothing is happening. That's a crime. I mean, these people are dying. What are we doing about it? Mm-hmm. You know, it's my job to try and figure out a way to get under people's skin, to get people talking. Recently, I photographed a story on rape as a weapon of war, and 2 South Sudanese women who had been raped inside of a UN camp. And they both got pregnant with children from their perpetrators. And Time magazine very bravely ran a picture on the cover of one of the women naked, showing her very pregnant stomach. And the reaction was incredible. And so many people started talking about rape. Finally, it was on the table because the image was shocking. The image was powerful. But it takes that to get people to pay attention.
Mm-hmm. Becca, you know, one of the things that struck me when I talked to you the other night was that you said that so many of the people that you process are often people who've actually helped the United States at some point or other. Tell me about those refugees, the ones who have actually been helpful to the United States and now can't get in here.
So we have a huge number of clients who have worked either as interpreters for the US military or who have been human rights activists supported by the US. We have one client actually in Afghanistan who's a woman. She was recruited by the US as part of an effort to try to integrate women into the Afghan National Army. And she was brought here with 3 other women and trained as helicopter pilots. And 2 of them stayed here. They ran away and applied for asylum. 2 of them went back to Afghanistan. 1 of them disappeared. We think she's dead. And of the 4, there's 1 left. And the Afghan National Army won't let her come to work because she's a woman, and this project of the US's didn't work. It was not well thought out to integrate the Afghan National Army 4 women at a time. And we asked the US Embassy, please give her a visa. They're trying to kill her. They're trying to kill her because you convinced a 19-year-old woman to come here and try to get trained to serve in her country. And the embassy said, no, we don't think she's in danger.
Wow, it's unbelievable, actually. And then you had another incredible story, the Kafka story of the woman who was raped and was then therefore, you know, considered. You tell me the story.
We had another client who was a women's rights activist in Iraq, actually, a fairly prominent one who had gotten all sorts of commendations from the U.S. And when she applied as a refugee to come to the U.S., she was rejected under a provision of the Immigration and Nationality Act that says that if you have committed a so-called crime of moral turpitude, or a really bad thing, for those of you who aren't lawyers, you can't come in. And her crime of moral turpitude was that during the reign of Saddam Hussein, she had been kidnapped, raped repeatedly, drugged, forced to marry a man, and then he had sued her in criminal court for alimony, and she was found guilty. And the US said, you're a criminal. You can't come into this country. And we won her appeal with a little bit of help from the Washington Post, which is always a good way to, you know, launch a legal appeal for somebody. And she arrived in this country actually 2 months ago and is safe now. But she shouldn't have had to go through that. This woman who had been through so much shouldn't have had to have, again, been called by America, been called a criminal and denied safety.
Liz, are the kids in your camp the ones who do make this deadly escape and who get to the other side? What happens to them?
In the UK?
Yes.
Children that do make it, there's a number of different things that happen depending on what they decide the age of the child is. That's one of the first hurdles that the children have to go through is the authorities deciding what age. If they are obviously under 18, then they tend to be taken into the care system. We've at the moment got a number of children where that's happened. We estimate they're about 12 years old. They're children that we know well. Sadly, their experience is not good, and we are aware that they're very, very distressed, and provision for them, albeit they are warm and dry and fed on an emotional level and psychologically, sadly, the system is failing dramatically. So we are working in the UK now with a number of children to try to address those particular issues. We're also deeply, deeply concerned with the UK's choice of not giving asylum to the majority of children, but to give leave of stay. And then when the child comes to about 17 and a half years old, they re-look at their asylum claim. Some of these claims are made when a child is 9, 10 years old, and it's called into question. If the authorities decide that their story at 9, 10 years old, when they've rocked up after a terrible journey and we don't know what else, is not good enough, then those childs are deported back to the country of origin, having been westernized, developed relationships with foster families, developed friendship groups, and grown up in the UK. the UK thinks it's appropriate to deport them back to the country of origin.
So incredibly cruel. Zainab, how do you think living in these circumstances changes the people that are in them? I mean, you yourself left your own country, Iraq. It wasn't a choice, you had no choice but to leave Iraq. How does this experience ultimately change you now as an adult when you've been through something like that?
Well, as everybody who has left, it's like a common talk with those of us who are in exile or been forced one way or the other out of our countries. I spent the first year crying every single year. I mean, every single day, because I just miss my family, my country, my friends, my life. I did not see my family for 9 years. By the time I saw them, I left my brothers as children, and when I saw them again, they were men. You are left alone. I mean, and I had better circumstances than others, not very good, but still better. But, you're left alone and you are taken away from your safety net. So, I mean, it's always people, again, especially these days with the criticism of refugees and do we take them, do we not take them? It has to be so bad for anybody who wants to leave home. Because there's nothing better than home. It's your society, it's your language, it's your food, it's your culture. It's just really, I cannot explain. You have to be pushed to the limits in order to say, okay, I need to leave my home country.
Well, we've heard about so many painful things today, this evening. I'd love to ask each one of you where there is any hope in the situation. Anything hopeful that you've encountered that we can hold on to in the current refugee crisis. Lynsey.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've been photographing war and conflict for 16 years, and every time I go back, I'm always shocked at how much hope the people themselves have. I mean, these are people who have survived worse atrocities than any of us could ever fathom, and they still have hope. In fact, one of the women I just photographed, who I was talking about, who had been raped, I called to see how she was doing last week, and she wants to be a social worker. She's excited to go to Kenya and to become a social worker. I mean, so it's always, people are always trying to move forward.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Liz?
I guess my hope right now is, I'm truly grateful to have been invited here to tell people about what is going on, particularly in Calais, but across Europe. And my true hope is that the people who have watched this and are listening to it realize that there are no NGOs, there are no big organizations, and recognize the serious failings of UNHCR, and that people here now stand up and demand some sort of immediate action, because this is going on now. So my hope is, by speaking here, somebody will take some sort of action.
Zainab?
Well, there's good news and bad news. I mean, in 1993, Times Magazine had a front cover of raped women in Bosnia. And here we are talking about another coverage of rape, and still the same thing.
But we can't stop talking.
Right?
You can't stop talking about it. You have to make people care. You
For
have
sure.
to keep
No, for sure. But in a way that we have not evolved. We should not have this discussion in this time, and yet we are still the story keeps on repeating itself. So that's really the bad news. The good news is that what keeps me optimistic the whole time is that it pushes, you see the best of humanity as well. I mean, I recently met an Iraqi woman who was raped by ISIS, tortured, raped, horrible, horrible, horrible story. And I said, and it's not easy for a young woman to speak in her own culture, in her own language. And I said, so what's triggering you to speak? And she says, my consciousness does not allow me to be silenced. They killed my mother, they killed my father, they raped me. Not one of them, but 13 of them. I cannot be silent. So I see her courage, and it keeps me optimistic. Like, who am I to give up? I have to continue. We all have to continue advocating for them.
Okay.
My organization and myself, we've been working on the ground with Middle Eastern refugees for about 7.5 years now. And I have had, over the course of the first 7 years, people tell me that, oh, Iraq, that's so passé. We're not going to give you money. We're not going to help you. Middle Eastern refugees, that's not a thing. And And I'm hopeful because of this. You know, we're at Women in the World, and we're sitting on this panel, and we're talking about this, and everyone is talking about this. And to me, you know, the refugee crisis isn't new. What's new is that the world is finally paying attention. And to me, that's an opportunity for us to actually do something.
Thank you so much. 4 amazing women.